everybody, and welcome to the guest series from Beicip-Franlab. We have the pleasure to have Dr. Jijun Miao from SimTech today. We're going to talk about Discrete Fracture Network embedded in reservoir simulation on a fractured granite reservoir case study. So for today's presentation, we have the guest speaker, which is Jijun. I'll be the moderator. Also going to address some technical part as we made this study together. Just some guidelines in terms of the webinar features. As you can tell, by default, everybody is muted. If you have any questions, please feel free to go to the questions section and type your questions. We will be able to answer through the presentation or maybe at the end. And finally, we're gonna run some polls and to get some feedback. And at the end of the presentation, the webinar will become available on YouTube. Next slide. I would like to go back to the original work that was presented last year at the AAPG. This was a joint effort from CMPC, SimTech, Beicip, and Texas, UT Texas. We work on the fracture modeling with a conventional DFN and towards a more accurate description of the fractures on reservoir simulation, thanks to the non-intrusive EDFM method that was proposed by SimTech and thanks to heavy research. Next slide. So let's start with the introduction. Next slide. So some information about the field. This is a granite reservoir on a basement paleo uplift, and it is cut by 16 major faults. As you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, we have depth property display on a 3D grid. We have the 3D view, and you can tell the location and orientation of the main faults. We have a couple of wells that are relevant for the study display as well. And you can tell that there is a variation in the fault throat and the depth of the reservoir itself. We have around 15 wells with oil production, which varies from 70 up to 7,000 barrels per day. So the performance is very different depending on the location. The model size is 5 by 10 square kilometers. And on the left-hand side, we have a cross-section, a seismic section, showing the main, let's say, horizons that the client had as geological features. And remember, this is a granite, so we have mainly lithological variations, but also impact on the weathering effect during the uplifting. So there's a combination of the mineralogy plus weathering to draw those, let's say, boundaries that can somehow drive the distribution of the fractures and the performance of the wells. Next slide. Can I go to the next one? Yes. So just a quick overview on the methodology. The fracture modeling and DFN modeling, it's quite robust. And nowadays, there is plenty of, let's say, proven concepts and applied projects using this methodology. But the bottom line is that everything starts with a conceptual model. Fractures are highly variable. The drivers and the hydraulic impact of those fractures can drastically change within the reservoir. So when we approach the modeling part, we have to have a pretty strong understanding of the geological features and how do they affect the performance of the wells. So we start with some static data. As you can see in the table number 1 on the left, we have a series of input data, which compels core data, image logs, wireline logs. We also have some seismic attributes. We have potential outcrops or analogs from outcrops from similar areas. We can have a geomechanical analysis. And also we have the more abundant, let's say, data, which is the production data. And we need to bring together those two to provide a proper fracture modeling. Once we put this information together, we have in place a conceptual model. So the advantage of our of the tools that we use for this study is that regardless of the conceptual model, we're able to replicate that in a numerical way. So we can actually reproduce what we believe is happening in the reservoir into a reservoir model. So finally, when you have the DFN model in place, the discrete fracture model, you can do a couple of things. You can calibrate this with the dynamic calibration of the DFN, and then you can upscale for reservoir simulation, which is the conventional workflow. But now with SimTech, we were able to apply this in a practical case study for a new innovative way to introduce these geometries that are highly complex and that can significantly increase the simulation runtime when we go into reservoir simulation, when we transform that into, let's say, an unconstructed grid. So the EDFM method that we are going to present today, combined with the strong fracture modeling and DFN modeling, we can actually represent accurately the dynamic impact of the fractures in the reservoir simulation. And that's the objective today. Next slide. Next. So let's look at the information we had for the study. We talk about dozens of wells with production data, but in order to have a compelling representation of the static and dynamic behavior of these fractures, we had to have both at the well scale. So we select some key wells that had some dynamic data, such as mud loss, production, and also with static data, lithology logs, fracture logs, and KH interpretation. So this is just an example. On the right side, we have the fracture density log next to the image log, and we can compare what are the continuous description of those fractures and how do they compare with the log. And now this is an example of the well BC15, where we identified 72 fractures, and we correlate and group 3 main fracture sets that correlate with different tectonic events during the granite uplift. So this is important to take into account that there is no other log that can really provide information about the fracture characteristics. Usually in other reservoirs, you will use some sort of approach with porosity, secondary porosity, some kind of analysis that can give you some insights as for what is the actual, let's say, feature that this given fracture set will have. However, here we will have only the fracture, and we have granite. Therefore, there is no other way to account for any secondary property. These fracture sets, they have to be consistent with the, let's say, the main faults that will that will be generated during the uplift and the tectonic event, and then with other secondary events within the reservoir, such as thermal cooling and other, let's say, minimal horizontal stress events. Next slide. So this is just an exercise of how do we go to this single well model, and we generate the DFN around what is believed to be the drainage area of that single well. And when we're dealing with fractures, it's hard to establish what is the actual size of the fracture, because one thing is what we see on the logs, but the geometry itself, the fracture and the aperture, it's up to discussion. So that's why we model certain number of scenarios that we aim to calibrate during the dynamic simulation. Next. So when we go into the calibration, the goal of this study was to use the DFN, go to the single well, generate multiple scenarios that properly honor the static data, and then that can honor the dynamic data, and see which one is more likely to be the base case moving forward. And again, this is an iterative process. It's people dealing with reservoir simulation is very familiar with this. The only intermediate step that we're having here is that the DFN is, thanks to the EDFM, is providing an additional complexity within the geometry that actually captures the dynamic impact of the fractures in the reservoir simulation. Next slide. So this is just an example of the process. We generate the DFN. Thanks to the EDFM model, we embedded the fractures into the single well simulation. We calibrate, and we come up with most likely DFN model that captures not only the static description that we can see in the geometry, but also the dynamic impact in performance. Next slide. Okay, when we go into the full field model, so we have an idea of what are the, let's say, the parameters that those fractures have in terms of size, the length, the height, the aperture, the conductivity, thanks to the single well calibration. But now we need to generate the geometry in the whole field. So once again, we go back to the main wells that we can see in the right-hand side of the presentation. We have the main orientation. As you can see, it follows the main faults. So of course, the highest density for the fracture set that is west northwest east southeast. Is the set that has the highest density and is related to the uplift and the main faults. And then we have secondary fractures, which is the conjugated set to this event. And then we have the north-south, which is very, very low in comparison to the main fracture set, but it brings some connectivity within the network. So we want to keep them all, because to some extent, these fractures are likely to help to understand the connectivity of the fracture network. And just to summarize, we can tell that the fracture density goes from 0.55 to 0.3 fractures per meter, depending on the, let's say, on the fracture set. Next slide. What are the control parameters that will help us driving the, let's say, the distribution of fractures away from the well? So the well give us a baseline of the geometry and dynamic properties, but then we have to look into the geology of the area to understand how to extrapolate these potential fracture sets. So first of all, we have some information from lithology. We have some information from lithology. We have a couple of different composition of the granite, right? And this is also having a different response on the weathering. So we can gather the fracture sets on top of the composition of the granite. So in that sense, we're going to have at least one geological element that can help us extrapolate the fractures. Next slide. Now, on the additional factors that will control the fracture density, we can bring the maximal principal stress, for instance, in the top left side of the screen. You can tell that the point where you have the highest fall throw has the highest maximum stress, and the areas where you have very low fall throw, you have low maximum principal stress. So that's telling us that to some extent there is a contrast on the fracture intensity within those 2 points. So this is another geological element that will help us to extrapolate the distribution of those fractures. We have distance to the faults. We have distance to the faults as well. And when we combine all these elements, right, for instance, the east-southeast fracture set in the bottom left part, you can tell that has a strong control of the distance to the fault plus with the principal maximum stress. And the reason why is because this particular fracture set is following the main faults, but also is driven by the stress. We suppose, and the conceptual model tell us that away from the wells, we should see this kind of behavior and let's say variation in fracture density for that particular fracture set. And the same thing for the others, which are not strongly related to the main faults because they have a different genetic tectonic event. Next slide. So once we combine all these geological elements on top of the, let's say, the modeling part, we have 2 challenges. First, to calibrate all the wells. And second, to generate the actual geometrical feature. Meaning that a very few software is capable to deliver such amount of fracture features. And FracaFlow, which is the software that was used in this study by Beicip-Franlab, is capable to generate features of all scales and can really ensure that whatever you have in your conceptual model, you can generate in the numerical model. So after this, we generate hundreds of thousands of fractures with different sizes and different orientations. As you can see, they all follow, of course, the drivers that I just present in terms of the extrapolation and the geological features. And this is the main input for the next step, which is a full field reservoir simulation. So the DFN, the geometry itself, is going to be used as part of the simulation with an intermediate step that we will see in the next part of the presentation. But I just want to point out that for this particular case, the grid size was 50 by 50 meters. So there are some fractures that are higher, the length and the height is higher than the grid size. So, okay, there is no very, a lot of issues representing that. But when you have fractures that are smaller than the cell size, it's really become challenging in terms of modeling to accurately represent that. And even to generate those features, very few softwares can do that. Most commercial tools will just generate that as an implicit property, but with FracaFlow, we can actually generate the geometrical feature, and that's the value for the simulation thanks to EDFM. So with this part, we cover the DFN generation, which is having in place a static model that calibrates at the single well level, let's say the geometrical and dynamic properties of fractures. But now we want to see how to utilize that for field development plan and to accurately make an assessment of the performance, future performance of the wells. So I think there is a couple of questions. Let me see. Okay, there is one question that says, what are the input parameters for the EDFM? So the input parameter is the DFN, the Discrete Fracture Network, where we are looking on the screen. The geometrical feature is a 3D volume that has hundreds of thousands or even millions of planes embedded. Okay, there is another question that says, what is the KH log? The KH log is the permeability plus reservoir thickness potential. So it's a common let's say way to represent what is the drainage area and the potential of a particular well. Okay, there is another question in terms of how can outgroups be included in the model. So outgroups can give you the geometrical understanding of fractures. So as I said, when you look at the image log and you look at the fracture density, you just have a snapshot of the fracture. You don't know, the only thing you know is that the fracture is as big as the wellbore, but exactly how high and what is the length and height of those fractures is still up for discussion. So outcomes can really help you to narrow down the geometry of these fractures. Okay, we have many questions, but I would like to pass on into MG, and maybe he can address some of these questions during the presentation, but if not, at the end, we will go through the presentations again. The floor is yours, MG.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Can you hear me good? Great. So thank you, Felipe. Excellent talks. And my name is Jijun Miao, and Felipe introduced. I'm served as the CEO of SimTech. And also today, I have the honor to invite my partner, Dr. Yuri, join us here. Yeah, he will answer any question about EDFM because he's one of the inventor for EDFM. So, so before talk about the left part, I'd like to briefly introduce SimTech. SimTech is a new start company in 2017, and we are dedicated to develop the EDFM for fractal reservoir simulation. And so people are very familiar with this traditional fracture simulation method like LGR, which is very popular for unconventional, for hydraulic fractures. Today, I'm not going to talk about it very well, although we did a very excellent job for that part. And for natural fractures, we know DPDK maybe is the only option for previously dominant options. But DPDK, as we all know, which is a simplification process. Of course, during the simplifying process, a resolution will be compromised. So we are always looking for some new approach to try to get better fracture simulation results, which is why we developed this embedded discrete fracture model, which is EDFM. So in this method, we can make every segment of the fractures have their geometry and their properties. So here, like in physical domain, we have the reservoir, and we have 3 grades to represent those physical domain in computation domain. And also we have 2 fractures, 1 large fractures, 1 smaller fractures. And we can see the large fractures have some intersecting section with 3 blocks. The second fractures have 1 intersection. So later on, we will create the fractures grades to represent each segment of the fractures. And then we will create the correlation between matrix with the fractures and the fractures with fractures, even fracture with the wells. Final step is to calculate the intersections, the transmissibility between those intersections. Okay, so overall, the EDFM has the best performance in terms of accuracy, computational efficiency, and the flexibility. Right now, a lot of people really like unstructured grids. This method can capture very complex fracture geometry. That's true. But actually, if you want to really do that, you need to create a lot of tiny fractures along the grids along the fractures. That will consume a lot of your computational capability. That is very difficult to grade, and that's why you need a supercomputer to do that. Also, you cannot do some slant fractures. So overall, EDFM has the best performance comparatively. Let's talk a little bit about the EDFM history. So as early as 1990s, Dr. Felipe and Eugene Austin, they gave this concept to dealing with the faults. That's how it comes. Then in 2008, Lee, these two pioneer researchers, they introduced this into natural fracture in 2D simulation part. And until 2010, Dr. Savonori's group and Eugene Austin, they started to systematically study the EDFM. They developed in 3-dimensional, and they defined many keywords. And of course, at that time, they developed this for in-house UTCOM and UTCAM. And later on, they found this method is actually could be introduced into third-party commercial reservoir simulator, which is called a non-intrusive EDFM. We can enable any reservoir simulator like PumaFlow can have this capability to handle complex fractures. And in 2017, SimTech got the exclusive right to commercialize EDFM. So after that, we developed a lot of gadgets to get data prepared, and our capability for EDFM is promoted. And also, we applied a lot of case study with real data. So after around 3 years, EDFM has well developed. Now we have a core EDFM preprocessor, and we have EDGS. So with this software suite, we can EDFM is now playing as a bridge to couple realistic fractures model to any reservoir simulator. For example, here we build model with FracaFlow a lot from natural fractures. Then through EDFM preprocessor, we can input those fractures into PumaFlow, and then PumaFlow can get the complex fracture geometry. And also for hydraulic fractures, we already developed some data transfer module for kinetics, gopher, steam plant, and light, and we can introduce those fracture geometry into any reservoir simulator. Later on, I will talk about what kind of data we will need. I saw those questions were great questions. So to date, actually, we already got exposed in around, we have almost 20 case studies all over the world. Yes, that's a lot. We got a lot of support from our clients. And also in 2019, we got 2 recognition from JTT magazine as new emerging technologies. Yes, so we are very proud. Our team is really proud about the recognition, and we are so encouraged to do more to make EDFM more powerful. And next, I will majorly talk about EDFM with DPTK, these 2 methods to make some comparison. These slides show after we build the geology model and the fracture model, this triangle represents the fracture model like DFN from FracaFlow. And for traditionally, DPDK data is use a matrix and then copy a matrix grade, then upscale those fractures into the duplicated grades. After that, they merge to run the reservoir simulation, got the results. And what EDFM did is we use the same inputs. We use same matrix grade, and we use the same DFN model. And EDFM will attach the fracture grades and include the fracture geometry, fracture other property like apertures, like permeability, all the information. We attach those grades information with the matrix. Then after that, we use the same reservoir simulator, like the traditional method used. Then we got the results, and we developed a special visualization module. After that, we can extract all the fracture information from the results from EDFM fractures. And this diagram, we want to show basically how EDFM and DPD is different. The blue and the red line represent the fractures. And please pay attention to the gray box, which means there have multiple fractures in one cell. So for order-based DPDK, they will simply find it as one, as a connected fractures. But what the EDFM did will separate, will treat them separately exactly like this. So this is a major advantage for EDFM. Many people already did excellent research to do the comparison. Like Felipe in 2014, they already did some real case for water flooding case study, and their conclusion is on contrary to DPDK, in EDFM, fluid flowed fracture by fracture inside jointed cluster, and the connection between disconnected cluster relies on the matrix cells. So this is a diagram show three-dimensionally if two fractures connect each other in cells, how the fracture fluid inside will be treated differently. So to better understand those these connections, we build this simplified model for injector wells and the producer. Here you can see in one cell, there's two disconnection. For DPDK method, there is two sets of grades. So here for EDFM, the fluid flow will be majorly happening inside the fractures. And for a DPDK method, much more grades will be getting involved. So is the production. Here from the producer, well, we got a DPDK will produce more waters in EDFM method. So this is a still ongoing comparison. We will publish the paper in the coming ARMA. And also we know for DPDK method, they already developed a lot of different methods. And also those methods could be different. They consider many connections. So also we, based on our single DFN collaboration model, we build a reservoir model. Here we got, this is the three-dimensional image. We separate two groups of fractures in terms of their size. So for different fracture groups, we have different fracture permeability properties. We did many testing and trial. We found for EDFM, the long fractures like which cross multiple grade cells have much bigger influence for flow between the cells. But those fractures, the fracture length is smaller than grade size, which will have very tiny impact on the pressure or the fluid. So that's why we separate the fractures into several groups. So when Felipe did the DFN model, they use FracaFlow to screen all those fractures in different sizes. So that's why we set a 4 scenario. Like case 1, we treat large fracture and small fracture with EDFM, both. For case 2, we treat large fractures using EDFM method, and for smaller fractures, we simply upscale them to matrix. For case 3, we introduce DPDK for small fractures, and for case 4, we treat both large and small fractures with the DPDK method. Here you can see the grades number will be different for this 4 scenario, and also the computational time will be different. So we use the EDFM history matching parameter to simulate the other 3 scenarios. Here, the purple one is EDFM results, the pressure response. And here you can see the red one is case 2 single well with EDFM, and case 3 and case 4 is with DPDK. So DPDK's pressure response is higher than EDFM because the overestimate of the connection. That's a case. And for the case 2 single well, because we merged some fracture into matrix, so that's underestimate the connections. So since the EDFM is more accurate, can we just use EDFM to simulate the whole reservoir? So here is the example. We merged different number of fractures. Then for EDFM, we need to add additional EDFM grades to represent the fracture segments. If you have more fractures embedded like this, have less than 100, this have 6,000, then you need to add a lot of fracture grades there. So we can imagine if you have like 1 million scale natural fractures, the additional grades will be overwhelming, which will be beyond the current reservoir simulation capability and even EDFM capability. So that's why we think you can see here, case 3 and case EDFM is very close because we use EDFM and some smaller fracture with DPDK. That's why we propose to handle huge fractures and large-scale field application. We can use EDFM in conjunction with the DPDK method. So this is how we apply it. Here we have the full field DFN model, which is generated by Felipe. Their group is help us already pick out those fractures larger than 50 meters, the length, fracture length. So we got almost 13,000 large fractures. We treat them with EDFM, which is here, and you can see. And for those smaller fractures, we upscaling them into DPDK. Here you can see the sigma value here. And then after that, we merge those large fractures into DPDK model. And this is a simplified process. After we do the reservoir simulation, we can see this. So this clip, you can see here, which is a process quickly show you what model we have and what the reservoir fractures. And then here you can see we got pressure response in 3-dimensional, and you can see exactly the fractures pressure response. And also we can cut through, see the fractures, the drainage error, and we can look into that to calculate the drainage error or maybe related EU or something. Okay, so based on this reservoir model, we did 3 years of history matching. Here we have 11 producer. Now we have a set of DPDK smaller fractures, and also we have 3 sets of EDFM for large fractures. Now we can play not only DPDK but also EDFM, and even we can set each set of fracture in different parameters. Here, I showed the first time we directly input the calibrate fracture model into reservoir simulation and do the history matching. We got the result. And you can see this is not bad. So the field engineers, they are very excited that, oh, this is really kind of very easy to get a matched results. Of course, after that, we did a lot of improvement. So here you can see we matched the BHP, flow rate, and the water saturation. The result is overall 11 wells is pretty good. Here we have 3 wells which have very better field data. So, but the overall result is a pretty good one. And our clients use the matched model to do further well optimization and production prediction jobs. Here we proposed some like the base well we did is calculate the production rate, and also we proposed some vertical well. Of course, we have some horizontal well to testify, to verify our prediction. This is new new wells drilled I think last year, so we got the results. It's pretty good, and then we tried the horizontal well and as well. So later on, the clients accept mixed horizontal and vertical well proposal. So we just talk about how we try our application, our EDFM in fractured reservoir simulation. And this is, to be honest, this is our first DFN case. Before that, before 2017, we never imagined we can handle like more than 1,000 fractures at that time. To summarize, before that, I'd like to update some progress on our DFN model and calibration. This is a very interesting case. Now we have production logging data. So we use those data to recalibrate our well DFN model. Like here, we have different piezo, their produce rate is different. So now we can pick out all the perforated fractures here, and we can tune them independently. So after we tune their permeabilities, then we can match different zoos production. Through those methods, we can further calibrate our well DFN model, which is very important for like how you treat your water produced wells. So now we can make our fracture model more reliable and matched, agreed with your production data. And also, if you have more constriction from dynamic information, that would be very helpful. Also, in order to research the water intrusion or water flooding, we developed some to separate different groups of connected fractures. Like here, different color means different connected fracture. Those fractures in red, they are totally isolated. So if you want to improve your combination speed, you can simply upscaling them into matrix or DPDK, because that have minor influence on the fluid flow inside the fracture system. Also, we have capability to search any possible water path, like a flow path, so that we can research which path is the most possible water flow, water intrusion directions. And with our new visualization module, we can not only check the pressure or water saturation or oil saturation in matrix, but also now we can see through those fractures. We just because respond in matrix and the fracture is totally different. So this clip is showed a section model. There you can see the water there's bottom water. Now after production for certain years, the water will be getting into your well through those fracture segments. So this now we can pick those fracture, and there are water intrusion process out. And here you can see this is a pressure response. So somewhere we can, this is like a major producer. Later on, they got a problem for water production. So we got a proposal, okay, for the wells, you need to be careful. Maybe, and when they are young, you need to control their production capability so that you can contribute longer. Okay. So another case I want to share with you is about the shale oil. Our clients, before we get into this job, our clients try to match the production without natural fracture because they think natural fracture is not very developed there. And of course, it's difficult for them. So later on, we build the DFN model for them. And then we merge the DFN model with the hydraulic fracture. And here you can see actually their natural fracture system is pretty a lot of there. And once we merge with natural fractures, okay, it's very easy to get a fracture matched because they have very heavy oil. So with the shale reservoir or heavy oil, it's almost not flowable. So that's why this is a very good example to show people, even for unconventional, you need to be careful about natural fracture system. Actually, the natural fracture system is very important. So to summarize, I think it's perfect time. And to summarize, as you can see, EDFM, it's a proved approach. It's a very promising. And with EDFM, current fracture simulation method is expanded. And now engineers have more option. You can play fractures explicitly. You can look into the fractures and you can check, you can make comparison between DPDK and EDFM or other method. You can, yes, have more options is good, right? And the EDFM is quite a new technology for field application. And to explore the capability of EDFM, actually, I think an integrated multiple discipline team is really necessary. And because this multiple team can make sure your geology information could be transferred smoothly to reservoir engineers. Otherwise, because I'm a geologist, so I don't want our knowledge be damaged or compromised during the DFN model to reservoir simulation part. So that's why we think EDFM can bridge the geology directly into reservoir simulation. And also during the process, actually, because it's quite new, so you need a very patient to make an error and to decide the details and make right choice about what strategy, what kind of fracture you want to use EDFM, what kind of fracture you want to use EDFN, or even unstructured grades. So EDFM is very flexible and it's efficient. So right now, our new version can easily handle 10,000 or even million scale fractures. So we have the capability to do the search to find the best solution. And to be honest, it's our clients who pushed us to develop EDFM more and more powerful. Yeah, 2 years ago, we never thought about 10,000 fractures to handle it. But now we can handle many scale fractures. So, so we are really appreciated and we are humbled to learn more from our clients. That's why we are so eager to try to listen more comments and feedback from all our colleagues and people really love natural fractures or hydraulic fractures. So we are a company really dedicated to fracture simulation part. That's it.
Well, yes, MG, thank you. I think that summarized. I think this was a breakthrough in terms of the practical application. I know we worked together. It was a completely new workflow, but really communication between tools understanding of the physics behind by the team, the client, and taking into account that this particular reservoir was, I mean, there cannot be a place where it's more relevant to understand the fractures and to model them properly. And I'm glad we have the chance to share this with the audience. I have a couple of questions. Well, there is I answered some of them via chat. I hope the answer is good enough for you guys. I will move now into some comments on the simulation part. We have more a comment rather than a question from Sergio Calvante. He mentioned that dual porosity, dual permeability was not conceived to model connections between fractures, but to model fractures as fracture media, where we may approximate a superficial velocity. Hence, it assumes a highly connected network of fractures, whereas EDFM fills the gap by allowing to represent less connected fracture media. That's correct. Dual porosity, dual permeability, especially with the ODAS analytical approach, overestimates the connectivity of the fractures within the cell, and that was always a downside on the conventional workflow, and upscaling these geometrical features into really just one single value that was most likely overestimating the overall permeability tensor of that particular cell. Thank you, Sergio. There's another question from Antonio. I see you model fracture aperture as high as 10 centimeters. Is it correct? What is the bulk porosity? What is the max old column? I think I can answer the first part. So the aperture, it's coming from core data. So those wells, they have core data. So we were able to map the present aperture and under stress aperture. And yes, I agree, it's quite high. It's not as it's like the regular classic aperture, but that's what was observed, and especially in the wells that they're producing 7,000 barrels per day. The bulk porosity, I don't recall that exactly. I don't know, MG, you have idea about the bulk porosity and the maximum old column for this particular model?
Yes, I think Dr. Yui is the best person to answer that kind of question. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the fracture porosity based on your fracture aperture and the fracture size in the additional fracture grade. We will calculate this bulk fracture porosity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you recall the maximum oil column that will serve according to the model?
You mean the reserve, right?
Yeah. What's the estimated wide oil contact in the?
Yeah, I forgot. Sorry. Yeah, our other co-author, they are in same piece in China. Right now, it's not good time. They are the present answer.
So yeah, so we'll get back to you on that one, Antonio, via email. And we have a question from Kaladar. How do you generate an equivalent dual porosity, dual permeability model for modeling small fractures compared to large fractures generated by EDFM?
Yeah, but
this one, I think many we use ODA to generate equivalent dual porosity, dual permeability model with only small fracture. I think many commercial tools also can do this upscaling. And the large fracture, we don't do upscaling. We just input our EDFM preprocessor and just run a simulator.
yes, normally like I think Puma the FracaFlow and I think Petrol also have some module. For the DPDK model, we did not do more research or develop that kind of stuff. So normally we use a commercialized software. We know there is some advantage, new progress for DPDK, but we didn't see that yet. But we'd like to try it if there's something available. Yeah.
Okay, I guess you already answered this during your presentation. Did you compare forecasts with actual data?
Yes, that's a good question. Actually, we have for this case here. Actually, we already did some comparison. Since some new wells like here, horizontal well is drilled. They did not give us data until we give the presentation. They said, okay, how that is equal, how the results is together. And also we did some blind testing. We have like this example, we have a few wells. We calibrate this well, then we use other wells to do validation about the model.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's a question from MC. What is the basis for the fracture shapes chosen? Crystalline environment fractures are not usually shaped like sedimentary shape, high aspect ratio fractures as you have it there. So we run many iterations on this matter because geometry was a completely high uncertainty during the modeling, and as there was another comment on the chat question about how the seismic attributes can help, but they don't really help that much because it's a granite, so we have a lot of issues with the surveys, and they're not really dedicated to gather information from crystalline rocks. But when we did all these iterations, we don't only play with we didn't only play with the shape, but with the size. So when we look at all the scenarios, the shape was not adding a lot of variation in the outcome. So for modeling purposes, it was a secondary, let's say, parameter. We have another question. Are the properties of fractures dependent on reservoir pressure? So yeah, I think we didn't observe that yet. There is not a lot of depletion. I think this question is going to to address whether or not by producing the hydrocarbons, since we have no metrics support, fractures and their aperture and conductivity could change through time. I think that maybe a 4D model, if we can circle back to this model in a couple of years when there is significant depletion, that would be very interesting, but we didn't address that at this time. So there is a question from Walid. Hello, Walid. How many DFM plus EDFM projects you work so far, and in what geological settings?
Which one? Can you see which question that is?
Yeah, it's from Walid, and Walid is asking how many DFM plus EDFM projects you have worked so far, and in what geological settings. I think you show a couple of examples in unconventionals, and you show the examples in these tight carbonates, plus this crystalline reservoir. So I think after a year and a half, we should be in the dozens of studies, right?
Yeah. For natural fracture system, I think we have around 8. Some we cannot share here. Some include like South America, about Carboniferous, in Middle East, some part. Yeah.
Okay, so there is a question from Igor. He's asking whether or not there was a metrics modeling in the simulation, or whether this was a type 1 reservoir, like the White Tiger in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah, this is good. We check a lot of, let me see. Yeah, we did White Tiger, absolutely. We are we did a lot of comparison with that, lateral research on that, and this is a kind of similar with that kind of, and also some cases from China, but a very minor case was from China.
Yeah, but just to clarify, did you use porosity and permeability within the metrics or not?
And yeah, we use a matrix. We think for help with the porosity and permeability as well.
So this weathering effect on the uplift was considered to some extent as the metrics support for the system. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, there is the last questions I see. It's whether there will be a record of this. And the answer is yes. Once we finish the record, it will become available via a link that you guys will receive. I think we are reaching the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for attending. If there is any additional question, we'll follow up on via email. So I will leave the chat open for whoever you guys want to add more questions, and I will reach out to follow up with you. Thank you so much and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.